That's Patchley reporting, and welcome to the Weak Link, TuxCare's live security briefing, where we brief you on recent cybersecurity attacks across the stack. I got some notes in front of me today. Today's breaking news comes from the IPv6 Frag escape. Frag escape. That's a good. It's an interesting name for that. There's a new Linux kernel issue making the rounds. It has picked up the nickname IPv6 Frag escape, which sounds like one of those names. Well, you already know there's a story behind it. I can bet you there is a total full story behind this. The thing that caught my eye, that there's already a public proof of concept out there, but there does not seem to be a CVE yet. So we're in that weird in-between stage where people are talking about it, but a lot of the normal security machinery may not have caught up. I know, it's pretty sad. We got to get the ball rolling here. Now, I'm not going to pretend to be the kernel expert here, unless we're talking about popcorn. In my spare time, I'm a front-end person. So when I see IPv6 fragmentation, socket buffers, and kernel memory all in the same sentence, that is usually my cue to bring in someone who actually knows what they're talking about. Just give me 1 second, I'll bring them on. And if you run containers, CI runners, shared hosting, developer sandboxes, or any kind of Linux environment where different workloads are sharing the same exact underlying host, this is probably worth paying attention to. Now, I don't want to oversell it. This is not some internet-wide remote code execution situation. It does not mean every Linux box is suddenly on fire, but it does seem like the kind of bug where the details really matter. It also sounds like the public exploit is focused on one specific family of systems right now, while the underlying issue may be a broader threat. Again, that is exactly why I want to bring in someone who actually understands this stuff. Our guest is getting ready now. Our team has also been looking at it internally, and from what I've heard, they were able to reproduce it pretty quickly. I'm going to let Pavel tell that story because he can explain it without me mangling the important parts. Next up, I'm going to bring up Pavel, our TuxCare correspondent. So before we get into what the team should do, I want to start with the basics. Come on, Pavel.
Hello, guys. So what do you want to hear?
Well, I got some Q&A for you. I'm sure that our viewers want to know. You are the right person for the job, and thank you for coming in live remote. Oh, yeah. Okay, I just got word. Yes, Pavel is remote. He is not here in the office with us. He is on site. So before we get started, what is IPv6 Frag escape in plain English?
So as it says, it's an escape. So it's a bug. It's a Linux kernel bug that turns into a container escape. So a process that starts with almost no privilege inside a container can use this bug, this vulnerability, right, to become root, to take root privileges on the host. So the problem, the vulnerability lives in the kernel IPv6. It's another part of this name, IPv6 packet sending code, specifically in how it sizes the part of the network buffer. So a small math error, which was there, this is the bug actually, is enough to corrupt kernel memory. And the scary part is that the process is not root inside the container, but since the bug is exploited, this process ends with the root in the host namespace. So it crosses the boundary of the container, which are supposed to be enforced. And that's where the name, again, we might be talking about this later. This is where the name comes from. There's no official CVE just yet, but the names try to be descriptive, right? It tells us the story that the bug, the issue, the vulnerability is, the bug is in how IPv6 is working, fragmentation, the error itself, and then the escape. So the process which uses this bug, enforces this bug, escapes and becomes root on host.
Okay, that's cool. So since there is no CVE and there is no formal name yet, you're saying that that's kind of where it got its nickname, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So it's not official. It's not an official name. It's just a descriptive name that whoever like came up with this exploit came up with. So IPv6 frag escape. So as I said, IPv6 it's the path, the vulnerability path. The frag is a fragmentation accounting mistake and an error, a bug, and then the escape is the end result. What happens when this mistake is being exploited to gain root privileges on host. And this is how the proof of concept is named. So CVE might be named differently.
Right, right. So what, there's a big pressing question. Why is this getting so much attention today?
Exactly because of this. There's no CVE, so there's no, let's say, official information about what's happening, but there is an exploit. So there is a code, basically a proof of concept, which was tested and which is proven to be working in the open. So anybody can go, basically take this exploit, take this code, and try to use this exploit on vulnerable machines. And this is a dangerous combination because most teams will probably rely on scanners, on tools which tell them, okay, your host, your machine is vulnerable because there is a CVE which explains like what the vulnerability is, and your machine is aligned with this CVE. So there's no CVE just yet, no advisory just yet, but the vulnerability is there, and most importantly, it is exploitable. So there is a proof of concept, or basically a code which can be used to use this vulnerability and to exploit the machine which has not been patched, which has not been upgraded to the latest kernel.
It's very interesting. So since there isn't a CVE, but there is a working exploit, how does that even happen?
Well, it's pretty simple. I mean, CVE, you can think about CVEs as a paperwork. So once there is a vulnerability, somebody has to describe it, give it a number, describe how the mitigation should work and stuff. But there's no CVE. The error, which was kind of small, was fixed in the upstream. So the new version of kernel don't have this error, but whoever understood how the fix work and what was the problem, the math, like this IPv6 bug, they create an exploit. So exploit is there, but tools, basically scanners, do not know about this problem.
Got you. That makes a lot of sense. So why is quote unquote no CVE, and for anybody that's tuned in, CVE stands for common vulnerability and exposure. Why is no CVE actually a bigger problem than it sounds?
Because as I said, I think that's how I see it. Most teams will rely on their tools, on their scanners, some process tickets, dashboards, whatever, to see that their systems are now vulnerable, and based on this information, will take action. But in most cases, since there is no CVE, no vulnerability, no scanner tells us that something is needed to be done. But that doesn't mean that vulnerability is not there, and most importantly, that there's no exploit, and the exploit is there, the PUC is there. So teams, I think that's the key message we need to deliver here. Teams need to act based on this information, not rely on the CVE, at least for this particular vulnerability.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it is still at the end of the day a vulnerability. At the end of the day, it's still an exploit. Even if there isn't a CVE or a number associated with that, it's still out there. It still needs to be fixed, and the CVE will come along as this progresses. That's great. This is being described as a container escape to host root. What does that actually mean?
Okay, so container, as the name suggests, is supposed to keep workload inside it, right? Walled off from the host. But exploit starts inside the container is an unprivileged process inside this wall, right? Given this math problem, and given the specific exploit of this math problem, the process abuses the container and escapes. So it can now write its own credential and neutralize the SE Linux in memory and trigger a root level helper on the host. So the result is an interactive root shell in the host initial namespaces and root file systems. And its own test and privilege in our test, the unprivileged tester could read /etc/shadow on the host, and that's an escalation. So that's how you gain a host root privileges.
Okay, that's good to know. Who should be losing sleep over this one, and who can just sit back and relax?
So we specifically highlight Enterprise Linux version 10's kernels starting from 6.6 up to 7.1, because 7.2, as far as I know, have already this fix, and that's probably how it get out and how exploit was created. So kernels are, we're not saying that kernels below 6.6 are not vulnerable, they just of lower concern. And anything, again, 7.2, anything which has the upstream fix is probably not vulnerable. Lesser concern, Ubuntu's 24.04 and Debian 13, the latest ones, later ones, they still have the bug, but the way those distributions are shipped, they have the init on allocation turned on by default. So we can say that they're not weaponizable, but we're not saying they're not safe. We are not saying they're safe. And then again, if it's just like a single machine, single user box with no untrusted workloads on it, then probably you shouldn't be that worried. But if it's multi-tenant, if you're a hosting provider, for example, multi-tenant machine with unknown process on it, you should definitely worry.
Okay, so if I understand this straight, the operating systems, the distributions that we really need to be concerned about are RHEL, CentOS, Alma Linux, Rocky, Oracle, and Cloud Linux, but Ubuntu and Debian not so much.
Yeah, if you want to put this distinction, yeah, everything which is based on enterprise Linux are like family of distributions. They are of bigger concern. Ubuntu's, Debian's probably of lesser.
Awesome. Okay, good. That's very, very great to know. Very good for our audience to know. Is there more of a drop everything? Is this more of a drop everything issue or a patch quickly but calmly issue?
Again, it's hard to, I try to stay away from these clear-cut distinctions, but obviously it's not remote execution, so nobody is like reaching across the internet to your machine, so it's probably not that much of a panic, not like drop everything. But as I said, if you have like untrusted processes, untrusted local executions on Enterprise Linux host, that might be closer to drop everything. So it's about like framing. So you should move fast. You should not wait for a CVE to appear. You should definitely take action. But again, if it's just like contained, if it's a local machine with some trusted processes, that's probably gonna wait for you in like a couple of days, maybe.
Yeah, moving fast is probably the best action to take, especially when stuff comes out like this. Yes. Not waiting for a CVE. Once it's there, start to fix it. That makes a lot of sense. What makes this different from a normal local privilege escalation?
So normal LPE, local privilege escalation, gets your root on the same machine you already have the foothold on. But this one crosses the container boundary, so it's different. It doesn't just escalate, it escapes, right? So it also chains further than a typical privilege escalation. So the process of heap overflow, then page use after free, 30 pageable, kernel read write, and so on. And it's quiet, so it defangs the SE Linux while get enforced still stays enforcing, and nothing changes on disk. So you usually have no information that something is wrong, something wrong is happening.
It's always the quiet ones. You know, it's always the quiet ones you got to look out for.
Mhm.
The next question I have for you, the bug is in IPv6 packet handling, but the exploit starts in a container. How do those pieces connect?
So containers still share the host kernel, right? So system calls and networking call all run in the same one underlying kernel. So the exploit reaches the problematic, the faulty IPv6 path through a specific unprivileged socket operation. So nothing that requires any special permissions. So the container isn't attacking another container. It's attacking while exploiting is being used. It attacking the shared kernel escapes from the sandbox from its own like walled garden, right? And compromises the kernel. And once kernel is compromised, like these walls don't matter anymore.
Gotcha. That makes sense. The bug exists beyond EL10, excuse me, but the public exploit is narrower than that. How should defenders think about that situation?
So I think that the distinction is between like the problem and the weapon. So there is a bug. It's probably not that serious, but the weapon is serious. So what we're talking here is that the bug is in every kernel, as I said, like 6.6 through 7.1. That's what you would call like blast radius, right? But they exploit the POC which is available, which you can use right now, is like on a narrow scale. So the blast radius is big. The weapon, at least until now, is really small. It's just what we were talking about, the Enterprise Linux 10. So it's very specific. But the system that just falls to checks isn't fixed. Yeah. So blast radius is big. It's only safe from existing POC, existing exploit, while the bug is still there. So you need to patch the bug actually, right, and do not wait for another exploit to appear.
Separate the bug from the weapon. I like that a lot.
Yeah, from a weapon. Yeah.
When we talk about products, where does kernel care fit into the response for this one?
The bug itself is pretty, I would say, is pretty simple. So, and the fix is small, self-contained arithmetic correction, and our kernel care works differently from normal patching. So kernel care is live patch, so it doesn't patch what's on disk, it patches what's in memory, and the patch is really small and pretty safe. So I would say the problem, the bug itself, the arithmetic error, is close to an ideal live patch candidate. That's what kernel care is using to live patch the systems.
Cool. Okay, that's great. Zooming out and looking at the big picture, are we seeing more of these fast-moving Linux LPEs? And what should teams change about their patching process?
Yeah, I think it's a pattern right now, and what we're seeing is that there is a fix upstream. Someone reverse engineers it. There is a working POC, working exploit in the public within days, sometimes just within one day. There is no CV that happens before a CV scanner. Scanners don't know. There's no like advisory, right, from which you start, and nickname appears, cache long, and normal scanning, normal patching is too slow for this. By the time the CBE, the number lands, the exploit being like usually circulating for days. So teams really need to find ways to act on upstream commits, to study credible POCs and do kernel analysis directly, and prioritize container hosts, CIs, shared hosting, as we were talking about, like these are probably the most vulnerable, and multi-tenant systems start with those. And most importantly, I think what needs to be done is the separation between the mitigation itself and remediation. So mitigations usually usually something which happens fast, it buys you time. So like live patching, memory patching. Patched code is in the endpoint. And for crucial Linux, this basically shifts you from waiting for a normal patch to appear, which can happen in days, sometimes weeks, to live patching, which happens almost immediately.
Well, I'm glad it's getting fixed and it's being fixed, even though there isn't a CVEL for it. Thank you for your time. We did just post a blog post about this. It's if you head to tuxcare.com/blog/IPv6-frag-escape-CVE, you can find all the info you want about that specific vulnerability. Thank you so much for joining, Pavel. Thank you, our senior correspondent advisor, Pavel Tokarev. And with that, stay tuned for more breaking news. And that being said, this is Vance Patchley. Stay safe. This is Vance Patchley signing off. Stay secure out there, Internet.